So, there we have it. The short-term future of Franco Colapinto has now been made clear. There'll be no surprise switch to Red Bull, not even a cheeky one to Alpine. It's all gone really, really quiet. So yeah, his fate may be sealed for now, but I think this is all part of the plan that Colapinto had in the first place. I think he's not bought into his own hype, so maybe this is for the best. So the news that has come about right before the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix weekend kicks off, the 24th race of the season, and even though I am grateful for more content to be had, it's been a very long year. The interest regarding the Argentinian race of Franco Colapinto has cooled off considerably since the heady heights of Baku and his 8th place finish right behind his teammate. Him and Albon securing the most amount of points in a single race Williams has had in years. Fast forward to now though, it's a completely different story. The narrative has shifted considerably. And for those of you thinking that there might have been a surprise twist in the tale, that maybe like with Michael Schumacher being plucked from Jordan by Benetton, there'd be this really high profile team taking an interest in Colapinto and they would swoop in, take him, and then pay off Williams, no questions asked. No, that's gone now. It's completely disappeared. Red Bull's Christian Horner has closed the door on Colapinto in relation to a place at either Red Bull-backed team, and now the further from Flavio Briatore from Alpine to secure his services there has gone rather tepid. And with everything else now filled up, there is now nothing left for Franco for next year. The subject is closed for the time being. Wait, Law, hang on a minute. Are you really sure about that? Is Alpine really no longer interested in the services of Colapinto? I thought Flavio really admired the guy. Well, about that, the Alpine organization. I fear its days are numbered. And for Colapinto to dodge this bullet, it might have been for the best, because if that had happened, and it's going the way I think it's going, especially with the Alpine team Threads admin really dropping a big hint about its future to me, I don't know whether that was wise or not, that it's all very well and good that Jack Doohan has a contract of sorts to be with Alpine next year, and he's managed to get a little bit of an opportunity this year for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix after Ocon and Alpine parted company. But the situation for Doohan, though, I don't think is that secure because where the team is going, and the fact that Renault, the Alpine Academy's main backer, is really not interested in Formula One anymore. So anyone under that Academy umbrella, I'm really concerned about their future, or at least it's going to take on a completely different identity, and maybe directive. Maybe Briatore might have buyer's remorse and the influence of Oliver Oaks is beginning to seep into the fabric of the team. Because I don't believe Franco is Jack's main threat of a seat. That threat is coming from Paul Aron. Him being made the Alpine F1 reserve pretty much seals it for me that the advances toward Franco were merely an insurance policy. You know, in case either Paul Aron's F2 campaign completely folded and he faded out of the top 3, meaning he doesn't get the full allocation of super license points, which by the way he hasn't, and he's now technically, mathematically still in with a chance of winning the damn thing, or maybe Mercedes actually looks back to Paul Aron and takes him back on again into their junior team. Because let me make this clear for you, Paul Aron, his season in F2 this year, has been completely self-funded. It's a gamble that he took to get away from Mercedes. It's seemingly paid off because the right people got into the right places. So with the way things are going at Team Ensign, if Doohan isn't scoring regular points or isn't close enough to Gasly in terms of pace in the first few races of the year, then I could easily see a mid-season swap with Paul Aron being put in the car and giving Estonia their first ever full-time F1 driver. And as some of you on social media have pointed out to me, quite rightly, if that's the case and Paul Aron gets the call-up to replace Doohan mid-season, which, by the way, I do not want to have because Jack deserves a chance, this will be the first time all top 3 F2 drivers from a season will be on the grid at the same time. The last time this happening was with Russell, Norris and Albon a few years ago. So wait, you're also telling me, Law, that Franco lost his seat at VCARB or the Red Bull fold to Isaac Hadjar? Isaac Hadjar? Well, yeah. I mean, Isaac's doing a really good job. He's in the top 3. He's getting the full super license points allocation. Of course it's going to happen. The talks to Franco with Red Bull were put to bed by the team principal. That whole speculative train of thought has now been quashed, with Horner summing up his thoughts with Colapinto in the most polite way possible, yet ruling him out entirely by stating that, "I'm sure Franco will find his way onto the grid in the future." By the way, I think he meant to add at the end there, "It's just not going to be with us." And honestly, I think he's right. Christian does have a really good pool of talent forming in F2 and F3 at the moment. More than enough to justify not bringing in any more outsiders, because the last time they did that with Sergio Perez, well, it sort of created a bottleneck. It's about to pop. because people are talking about what's going on with Checo, that he could be dropped after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and that the only things left to sort out before the news comes public is the finer details about what Checo will agree to in terms of compensation and his role with the team afterward. Does he decide to carry on as a brand ambassador and maybe do some fun runs in Formula One cars with Red Bull, or does he decide that he's had enough with the operation and cuts things off entirely? And according to Horner, that's up for Perez to decide, that he is old and wise enough to make a decision on his own without any external insistence. And that's a very clever move, Christian. I see through that entirely. You're not going to be blamed, so therefore you'll blame Checo, because that means he can tell the Mexican fans, hey, Checo decided to break it off with us, not us, we gave him every opportunity. So with him gone, it's a shootout between Lawson and Tsunoda for that seat probably, with Hadjar's super license points tally enough to bag a V-carb seat for next year, next to whoever loses. And then Arvid Lindblad will be stepping up to F2 alongside the other Red Bull F3 promotee, Oliver Goethe. So yes, there are plenty of options that Red Bull has to choose from. They are not lacking anymore. There are some compelling choices for the next few years, although I think Christian would ideally like to get Lindblad into F1 after Tsunoda probably leaves when Honda breaks ties with them, so you never know. Although admittedly Horner did say that for a brief moment Colapinto was considered, there were talks going on, but then, as he said, Franco crashed, so that put pay to any of that. I do think that is incredibly harsh though, because you've got to remember, that Williams car, it ain't a friendly car to drive, and there are other extenuating circumstances that caused Colapinto to have his crashes, particularly in Interlagos, when, as we found out, he wanted to be on the wet tyres, the team ignored him, and then that crash happened. Now hey, before you say anything about me being a Franco Colapinto hater, you are wrong. I've got more to say about this. Remember, I am a professional yapper. I am not done. Colapinto is a charming young man with a charisma that, quite honestly, is hard to find amongst modern F1 drivers, with media training being at the forefront of all concern to us to prevent any negative or savoury headlines getting out there and being devoured by social media. So you only get like maybe a few F1 drivers that have managed to buck the trend, including Max Verstappen, and admittedly Oscar Piastri, although you have to dig deep for that. You have to look really carefully for any snippet remarks. But as for Franco, he's been a breath of fresh air. With him only being around for like 8 or 9 races or something like that, there's been far less of that pressure. Sure, he has to toe the line and not bring Williams into disrepute, but he's done the complete opposite. Williams has now gotten much more good favour and good nature, especially after many people were thinking that they would lose support after dropping Logan Sargent. No, they managed to more than make up for it, and people care about the team again. Seriously, I look at the analytics on the Williams YouTube channel, it's grown in views considerably since Franco was appointed. And after Franco goes, I think the views will drop again. He made an impact, let's just say that. But seriously, Franco is amazing in interviews. He's so interesting, and I want more interesting people in my life. Because we need the right balance of charisma and decorum in Formula One, and Franco, I think he's got it. Also, even though recent form begs to differ, Franco can drive an F1 car well enough to score points. Way more points than Logan Sargent could accrue in a year and a half. Franco's done 5 times better in a quarter of the time, so long as there is no external pressure weighing down on him, because we got to look back at those first few races when Franco was brought up from the Williams Academy. There was no pressure. He could enjoy this opportunity that not many young drivers get, and many people were not really expecting Colapinto to get a promotion. Sure, a few FP1 sessions every now and again would probably be the best that he could hope for. That's exactly what he had at Silverstone this year. He was an FP1 driver last year, so that probably would have been the peak of his career, but no, he got the call-up for about a third of this season. But when his future wasn't really in consideration, he could actually relax and get to know the Formula One car and understand it, get a full race distance under his belt, and he applied himself remarkably and impeccably, gaining the respect of one Sergio Perez with his battles, especially around the Singapore Grand Prix, managing to get one off the start next to Albon. He certainly shone when the spotlight wasn't fully on him and people going, is he going to Red Bull? Is he going to replace Checo? Oh, Briatore likes him. Oh, he could be at any team he wants to be. That the scope of his future became so vast, it would completely dazzle any driver, no matter how cool, collected, and suave they are. And even though the luster around him has faded a little bit, he's certainly not disgraced himself in his time in Formula One. Although I must admit, the hype around Franco has become quite ridiculous and a bit overblown, and even he knows it, because I don't think I've seen Franco actually buy into his hype and say, oh yeah, I'm a shoo-in at that Red Bull seat, or oh yeah, Alpine look interesting. No, I don't think I've ever heard him once say anything about his future other than, I don't really know. We will see. So if there's one thing you can say about Franco is that he is definitely not an arrogant little twit. But that being said, he is only 21 and on the stage of the biggest motorsport in the world. It is going to affect him to some extent, but you got to admit that his form recently has faded a little bit in terms of comparing himself to Alex Albon, who has managed to recompose himself after being blindsided, especially as I said in Singapore, and being outqualified by Franco a couple of times, whereas Logan was never able to do that. So it was a bit of a wake-up call for Alex. He has responded well, and it was probably for the best that he got this now before Carlos Sainz arrives, because we've got to remember, the Abu Dhabi postseason test is next week. Carlos will be seen in Williams overalls next Tuesday, and that is going to be something to see. That's the end of an era, and that'll probably be the end of the era where Alex can be the big fish in a small pond without any opposition. Franco tested him, and he passed the test, but there is going to be an even bigger test coming up. Franco won't have that worry in the back of his head, and instead, he can now seemingly go back to the sidelines and develop with Williams behind the scenes. Maybe get back to F2 for 2025 or another series to take what he's learned from F1 and go from there. But one thing is evident for both he and Alex. Williams is not in a fit state right now. So if he suddenly got a surprise call-up next year, this might not do his career the world of good. The car is in such a state that it's prone to major crashes, and the performance is so wildly inconsistent that drivers have to push the car to beyond its limits to hopefully be in the hunt for points, which has also led to major crashes. It's a really vicious cycle, can you tell? Because as a result, it's brought the team to its knees, and I really feel sorry for this team. The mechanics have done a stellar job to even continue as a proper functioning F1 team. The situation has gotten so bad that they only have one spare front wing to share between both drivers, and they are lacking in terms of parts and redundancy for multiple parts. They've had to go to their power unit supplier Mercedes and ask for heritage parts, meaning coming from old redundant Mercedes cars, and Williams can easily fix the problem, and they hope to in the fullness of time, to have a car where they don't have to have the drivers pushing it to beyond its limits, and then you get into the position where you crash the car so many times. It's been a long season for them, but one that has been necessary if they want to really have any hopes of following through on their aspirations and goals for progression in the new regulation cycle for 2026, where Williams might have a chance of turning things around. After all, they got off on the right foot in 2009 with the regulations, so who's to say they can't do it again? And as for Franco's future in Formula 1, I am not at all worried about that, because quite honestly, he's in the best place if you hope to have a chance of a long career in the sport, because he's with the team that has his best interests at heart. Franco has done well to ignore as much of the external noise as possible and keep with the team that gave him this opportunity and fostered his young career. He's withstood the temptation of other teams and is sticking to the goal, which he has actually said right here. Ahem. If I don't have a seat in F1, I would like to still be racing. I guess they are trying to see at every opportunity what is possible. I want to always be part of the F1 paddock. I think it's very important that if it's not here, because there is not a chance for 2025, I hope to be around in 26 or 27. I hope to be showing that I deserve a seat here, but if I cannot be racing in F1, instead of looking at the TV for 24 races, I would love to be driving a car still. I haven't really thought much about my future so far. I've been trying to focus race by race and session by session and just trying to do my best. I'm not really focusing on what I want to achieve or what expectations I have. I'm just trying to do the basics right, and then we see where we end up, but at the moment, it is going well. So even though we might be hitting pause on Franco in F1, it's not like he'll be sitting around doing nothing or thinking that he's failed. Like I said earlier, I reckon he'll be placed back into F2, as well as becoming the definitive Williams reserve driver instead of the team relying on the Mercedes pool for the longest time, which up until recently was probably the job of Mick Schumacher, him being the lead Mercedes driver up until now, where he's decided to go it alone and try and figure out his future in motorsport with Alpine's WEC department as well as his own endeavours. And I'm pretty sure that he wouldn't want to race for Williams after Vowles' misguided comments saying that he wasn't special. Yes, it was taken somewhat out of context, and Vowles did admit that he made a mistake in what he said, but I think that probably would have left a sour taste in the Schumacher family's mouths. But one thing is for sure that Valls is clear about. He's not going to be forgetting Franco, because we've got to remember, Franco is the lead driver now of the Williams Academy. That is JV's bread and butter, his pride and joy. You seriously think he's going to allow that driver to sleep? No, he's going to make sure that he works harder than ever to get back into Formula One. Because one of the things that James excelled at back at Brackley, because he was with the team pre-Mercedes, was maintaining the Mercedes Junior team, which came into being after Toto dropped the ball with Max Verstappen, letting him slip through his fingers and go over to Red Bull. Because basically all he could promise Max was a season in GP2, and that was too long for Max, and then Toro Rosso came along. But at the same time, they had Hamilton and Rosberg in 2014. You really seriously think that even though Max Verstappen was talented in the junior ranks, that they would have replaced either Lewis or Nico? Really? No. And arguably, I think the same thing has happened with Paul Aron, because Mercedes/Toto wanted Aron to remain in F3 for another year, but Paul didn't want that. So he left the program to gamble his luck in F2, which is now worked out with Oaks taking in charge of Alpine and then having a path into F1, so we will see him in an F1 car. And then there's Toto's words with Mick getting into F1 falling flat. And I'm beginning to see a pattern here. But let's get back to James, because now that the interest in his driver has cooled down, and that means his future has now been made more certain, that he's going to be remaining within the Williams Academy and the team at large, they can now put into action the next phase of his development plan. So there is going to be more to be had here. So they're not just going to have Franco back in F2 and that's that. They're going to be trying to emulate what other teams have been doing with prospective junior drivers. The Alpine Academy, for example, by using old machinery. So let me tell you what James has to say here, because he's been very, very clear. I think those teams need to figure out what seats they have and don't have going into next year, before we can ascertain where he's going, if he's going there. If Franco is not in a racing seat next year, in F1 probably, we'll have a historic 2-year-old car. He'll be running in that plenty in order to get him up to speed. I've done this before in a previous life with Esteban, when he took a year out, and Esteban is here today, still a strong driver. There are things we can do effectively around it to maintain his strength. So yes, James is not going to be ignoring Franco, he's doing the opposite. He's going all in on him since he now has a proven benchmark in F1 from which to develop from. Okay, the aspirations of this academy aren't as grand as some of its competitors, but at least James Valls is trying to make it work, and he has an active interest in making sure junior academies actually stick to what they are promising. Unlike with Alpine, because it's my honest opinion that Alpine Academy is not long for this world, certainly in its current moniker. I think after Jack Doohan's appointment, it's either going to be phased out in its entirety, or it's going to become the high-tech GP Academy from 2026 with a different set of goals and a different list of drivers in mind for development. And if you think about it, it's going to be a really, really good pathway in terms of junior drivers, because if Alpine becomes high-tech GP for 2026, that means this will be the only team that has an active direct F3, F2, F1 pipeline. So it really means that if you start off with high-tech in F3, there is a better chance and an absolute direct comparison to people who are in the F1 brigade. That's going to be really tempting for any person who wants to get into bed with an academy. But right now, I feel incredibly bad for Victor Martin, because he was doing his damnedest this year to try and make an impression, and he really excelled in F3, so it's looking really likely that it's not going to be for Victor, and that's a crying shame for him. I feel bad for him. I'm not so sympathetic to Kushmaini though, and even though I know F2 it's every driver for themselves, he's still part of a team that has Gabriel Bortoleto in it, and he did not help him, and now the championship is within half a point. He made Gabby's job even harder. And by the way, yes, I am a Gabby fan. He's my Brazilian boy, next to my boy Oscar. So with Red Bull and Alpine / Hightech having plans of their own in mind, Franco sticking around with Williams is probably the best and most sustainable outcome if he hopes to get back into F1. Because he'll be with a team that he knows inside and out, and that know him inside and out. They're going to be supporting him unconditionally. They are going to be putting him as often as possible and as financially viable into the FW45 to give him lap after lap after lap thousands of kilometers of testing that is going to be proved valuable. And look at what happened with Alpine and Renault putting so much distance and time and effort and money into Oscar Piastri's development, and what he's able to do with McLaren now. I mean, I did see people making a point that the 2022 Alpine lineup of Fernando, Oscar, and Esteban, in only 2 years, they're all gone. And that's quite stark. Franco at Williams, driving that car, a car that he knows from FP1 sessions in 2023, and probably a lot of work in the simulator, I think that's a really good bet. It's something he's familiar with, he can build upon, as well as take on stuff from the FW46. This makes sense. And I believe that this was the plan all along for him. Although it's nice and flattering to have attention from the likes of Red Bull, is it a wise decision, though, for him to get the call-up? Because remember what happened when Checo got the call-up to McLaren after having a couple of good years with Sauber? It was completely a mismatch. It really hampered Checo's progression, and he was stuck at Force India. Although it was a compatible solution, he did get on well there. He only then got the call-up to a front-running team when Red Bull came along about 7 years later, near the end of his career. Same goes for Hülkenberg. There were talks of him going to Ferrari for 2013. Nico, Ferrari! There would have been wins, not land podiums. I think Franco's dodged the bullet because, let's say, for example, he goes to Red Bull or Alpine. It doesn't work out. He doesn't really cope with the team or the car or the overall dynamic with Gasly or the likes of Lawson or Sonoda. Then maybe the team might drop him because there's no investment, they don't have any connections to him. It was a flash in the pan thing, like Marco was with De Vries. And I'm not comparing De Vries to Colapinto, I'm talking about overall sentiment, I'm not talking about ability. But if it's not working out for them, they can drop him without any qualms that they had sunk so much money into him in the first place. And then Franco would have not had anything left because Williams would have had no choice but to move on with maybe Luke Browning or another hiring, and Alpine. He would have been left with no option, whereas now Franco still has an option, and it is a pretty good one because Williams is going places. And also, if James makes him the F1 reserve for Williams outright, he will be there for every race weekend in the F1 paddock, ready to pounce in case there is a chance with another team eventually if they get their act together, that is built on more solid terms, or maybe one of the Williams drivers departs in the next couple of years for a multitude of reasons. Say, for example, the 2026 car performs not to the liking of Carlos Sainz and he then can break his contract and go to another team, or Albon buckles under the pressure of Sainz, and then maybe Williams decides to end their contract with him early, so that means they can move on with the next chapter of their history, thanking Albon for his services, because as we've seen with Ocon, even though he was around and gave the Alpine team and Renault some success and podiums and a win, you can still end terms with only a thank you message on social media. And many people were quick to say that that was unfair and Esteban deserved more. Again, I don't think Ocon cares. But who's to say that the same thing can't happen to Albon? I hope it doesn't happen, and I hope that Albon can end his time with Williams on his terms, or, he decides to retire or find a better drive elsewhere at a top running team. But the reality is that things can easily change. Contracts can be broken or bought out. So Franco being right there at the heart of Williams, I think this is probably for the best. Some folks might be saying that he could try his luck with a brand new team coming into F1 for 2026. Perhaps Cadillac might want to bring him on board alongside Colton Herta. Now this is good news for the Andretti family that they're even in the conversation, but at what cost has this bore them? To find out more about Team 11 that is coming in a couple of years, watch this video next, straight after this one.